Welcome to this special Masterclass explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the most fascinating and, let's be real, highly testable chapters for your boards, the growth of Indian nationalism. How did a deeply divided 19th century subcontinent suddenly unify against British colonial rule? If you're an ICSE Class 10 student gunning for that perfect 100% in history, you are in exactly the right place. We're going to break down the absolute core, cause and effect pillars of this chapter with crystal clarity. Every single point here is high-yield, board exam-oriented stuff. So grab your notebooks, get laser-focused, and let's master this. All right, here's our roadmap for today. We'll quickly cover what is nationalism, the economic exploitation, repressive colonial policies, socio-religious reform movements, the power of the press, and finally, the birth of the INC. Let's get right to it. Section 1. What is nationalism? The baseline of a unified identity. So I want you to really think about this for a second. How did a completely fragmented subcontinent unite against a massive global empire? I mean, before the British, India wasn't a single political entity, right? It was a giant puzzle of princely states, wildly different cultures, and dozens of languages. To actually challenge the largest empire on Earth, all these diverse groups had to first realize, wait, we actually share a common destiny. And that realization, that is what we call nationalism. Simply put, it's a feeling of oneness and common consciousness among people living in a shared territory. It's built on a shared language, history, culture, and values, which ultimately compels them to seek independent statehood. This intellectual baseline was absolutely crucial. It literally replaced local, regional loyalties with a sweeping patriotic love for India as a whole. And that was the seed that blossomed into the demand for independence. Moving on to Section 2. The economic exploitation, the material grievance. Now, what's incredibly striking here is that the British policy of economic exploitation hurt absolutely everyone. It didn't matter what your social class was, it was a shared tragedy. Look at the peasants. They were crushed by excessive land revenue and taxes, pushing them right into the suffocating trap of moneylenders. Then you have our world-renowned artisans and craftsmen. The British systematically destroyed their livelihoods. They siphoned off raw materials like cotton and silk for cheap, and then completely flooded the Indian market with duty-free machine-made British goods. The newly emerging working class brutally exploited in English-owned factories. And even the educated Indians, who honestly hoped for some progress under British rule, hit a massive glass ceiling. They were stuck in tough, low-level government jobs with zero chance of promotion. Literally every single class had a material grievance. Which brings us to a massive, highly testable concept for your exams, data by Nairoji's economic drain theory. Nairoji, the grand old man of India, famously stated that the British followed a systematic policy of wealth drain from India to Britain. He essentially gave Indians the vocabulary to understand exactly why they were so poor. He proved that India's wealth was literally being siphoned away to fund the British Empire, leaving the country financially devastated. Oh, and real quick, before we dive into the political sparks, if you want to ensure your board prep is absolutely bulletproof, head over to our Telegram channel at t.me/ICSE_masterclass notes. You can download all our premium handwritten revision notes, mind maps, and previous year's questions for free. It's a total game changer, so definitely check that out. All right, Section 3, Repressive Colonial Policies, the Political Spark. Okay, look at this timeline of repressive policies. These acted as a rapid-fire catalyst for the nationalist movement. In 1877, Lord Lytton hosted the Grand Delhi Durbar. He spent an obscene amount of money to crown Queen Victoria the Empress of India, while at that exact same time, a horrific famine was starving millions of Indians to death. Talk about a grotesque display of apathy, right? Then in 1878, he rammed through the Vernacular Press Act and the Indian Arms Act. He even dropped the maximum age for the Indian civil service exam from 21 down to 19, which was a blatant move to sabotage educated Indians from passing. And then finally, in 1883, under Lord Ripon, we get the explosive Ilbert Bill controversy. Let's look at the blatant hypocrisy here. Under the 1878 Indian Arms Act, Indians were literally criminalized if they carried firearms without a license. But Europeans and the British? Completely exempted. They could keep their weapons, no problem. It was a deeply racist law designed specifically to humiliate Indians and treat them like untrusted, second-class subjects in their very own country. And then the final straw, the Ilbert Bill of 1883. The proposal was incredibly simple and fair. It just wanted to give Indian magistrates equal power to try British offenders in court. But the reality? a massive racist backlash from the British community in India. They protested, they organized, and they actually forced the government to withdraw the bill. For educated Indians, this shattered any illusions of fair play. It proved, without a doubt, that Indians could never, ever expect justice or equality under British law. They realized right then and there, we have to organize politically. That takes us to Section 4, Socio-Religious Reform Movements, the Internal Awakening. Here we see historical texts detailing the work of two absolute titans of Indian social reform, Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Jyotiba Phule. These visionary men fought against deeply rooted, brutal internal social stigmas. Why? Because you absolutely cannot have political modernization without social modernization. They were preparing the ground for a national movement. Let's break down the specific contributions of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Guys, this is a guaranteed topic for your boards, so pay attention. He founded the Brahmo Samaj in 1828. He was a massive champion of rationalism, preaching monotheism and the underlying unity of all religions. But his social contributions were truly revolutionary. He fiercely campaigned for women's emancipation, advocated for Western education, and played a crucial role in abolishing the cruel practice of sati. By aggressively challenging the rigid caste system and meaningless rituals, he fundamentally modernized Indian political thought. Then, shifting focus to Maharashtra, we have the legendary Jyotiba Phule. In 1873, he formed the Satya Shodhak Samaj, which translates to the Society of Seekers of Truth. His entire life was dedicated to fiercely deconstructing the caste system. He fought tirelessly to liberate oppressed lower castes, the untouchables, from Brahmin exploitation. And alongside his wife, Savitribai Phule, he pioneered women's education and the widow remarriage movement. By championing socioeconomic and gender equality, Phule ensured that the foundation of Indian nationalism was firmly rooted in basic human rights and dignity for everyone. Section 5. The Power of the Press, the Unifier. Now, let's talk about the press. Prominent 19th century publications like Amrit Bazar Patrika, The Hindu, The Statesman, The Bengali, The Tribune, and The Times of India completely changed the game. This explosion of media exposed the true, harsh reality of British rule day in and day out. For the very first time, a student sitting in Calcutta could read all about the struggles of a farmer in Maharashtra. It connected people. And here's the best part. Despite Lord Lytton's incredibly oppressive Vernacular Press Act, which was literally designed to crush local language journalism, the press prevailed. They brilliantly bypassed censorship to spread modern liberal ideals: liberty, freedom, equality, and home rule. It allowed entirely different social groups to exchange views and organize politically. The press was literally the nervous system of the entire nationalist movement. And finally, Section 6, the birth of the INC, the culmination. Let's trace the final steps. Step 1, the rise of socio-religious reform and economic awareness laid the vital groundwork. Step 2, widespread outrage over Lord Lytton's repressive laws and the Albert Bill provided the urgent spark. Step 3, the formation of regional political associations. And listen closely, a highly testable precursor you must know for your exams is the Indian Association of Calcutta, founded by Surendranath Banerjee. Finally, these regional groups organically merged into Step 4, the monumental first meeting of the Indian National Congress in Mumbai in 1885. The scattered, frustrated voices of India were finally speaking through one powerful, unified megaphone. Which leaves us with this final, provocative question. With the Indian National Congress now officially established, how would the mighty British Empire respond to an organized, unified India demanding its fundamental rights? The battle lines were drawn, and the true struggle for freedom was just getting started. If you found this explainer helpful for your board prep, I highly urge you to subscribe to the ICSE Masterclass YouTube channel. We are completely dedicated to bringing you this kind of conceptual clarity, along with killer memory tricks and proven board exam strategy explainers to ensure you hit that 100% mark. Keep studying hard, stay super focused, and I'll see you in the next explainer.